And then I start this recording here. This is what we're going to have for YouTube and maybe the VOD. All right. Hi, everybody. So let's go through it. So basically, the important part with this stream, what we're going to try to attempt, is I'm going to show you material on Final Fantasy Limited, the way our team prepared for it for the Pro Tour. It's important not to take it out of context. So the dates are important, right? So I'm going to show two presentations. The preliminary one, which is what I do at the start of the testing house. So in this case, we're talking 3 days into the format. And then I'm going to look at I'm just checking the mic is picking up everything. Yeah, cool. Sorry. And then we're going to look at essentially what happened after, right? Like the Wednesday before the Pro Tour, where things are at. So the difference is we have the preliminary presentation, which is to get people up to speed on the format, regardless of number of drafts, regardless of how much they've read spoilers or not. And then we have the kind of final presentation on the Wednesday, which is where we're setting up for kind of the Pro Tour. We're getting ready for it. That said, the information itself isn't going to be relevant probably for you if you were to play Final Fantasy Limited, because it's designed for a specific weekend with a specific purpose. So the volume is still a little quiet. Let me check. Okay, so the volume's maxed out on this, but I can increase the gain. Better? A little better. It's showing on yellow now, so I don't think I can increase this too much. This is like, yeah, it should be better. Like it's getting to like the yellow, which is like before it starts spiking or peaking. So no worries with that. Thank you. So yeah. So the big thing with this is always to remember this is done with a purpose. It's not to kind of go, oh, I'm not, like, limited formats are dynamic. So it's a mistake to think that anything I do for the prep of the team in Limited is meant to be lifelong for the life of the format. It's meant for that weekend. And it's meant for pod draft. So I'm going to talk not just about the presentation, but about the context of why a slide exists and what I'm trying to accomplish. Because, again, the goal is to get as many wins as possible in Limited, right? To increase the win rate, so to speak. Now, we have a team of people that's a little bit diverse in the sense of different profiles, different countries, different experience in Limited. So, like, we try to also build up. I'd say for this Pro Tour, I'd evaluate like at a B our overall take, and like given the scope and all, because few things we could have done better, I think, to support the people that were having trouble and struggling in Limited. Some major improvements in how we dealt with the drafts, etc. So that stuff is good. Okay, let's go for it. So if you're new to this, the big thing I do in this preliminary presentation, any presentation I do fundamentally with a goal, is having a mission statement. It's to kind of recap what the goal is. Now, remember, a lot of the people I deal with are young and don't actually know this reference. If you do, congratulations. We'll have to visit doctors all soon. But if you don't know this reference to FF6, the World of Balance, because the set, right, on the offset was a balanced set. Hey, Noah. So usually what I like to do is showing off what matters in one graphic. This is a little over-indexed on information in my taste. But the important part is I'm not trying to share the details of this, except for the parts in red, which I'll highlight. But it's to share the scope, right? So when you look at this, you'll notice that except for red that kind of has this gap, everything is kind of, like, every color seems, so to speak, playable. And then I highlighted the things that are important. I think the important parts for me are, I try to look at cards that, like, have not performed historically well in previous Limited sets and are performing well. I think that's a really important thing. So I noticed Combat Tutorial. A little weird. It's card advantage. Raw card advantage with little else tends to not do that well. Top blue common. Okay, what's up with that? Circle of Powers is also a very interesting one in that sense. Resentful Revelation, very interesting in that sense, right? And then I'm comparing also, you can see on this side, White Aura Sites connected to Fate of the Suncrest. So that's really tiny, sorry. But basically I'm comparing, White Aura Site, which is good, and Fate of the Suncrest was bad. Both white removal spells. So why is one so much better than the other? And a lot of it comes down to just board and value. Like, I play a permanent dealing with something and I get something. So all of the cards that were good were all +1, essentially, cards. So like when I'm looking at these win rates, the +1 cards are doing well. So we get then to what I like to do, which is, think about the context, right? And this will be different for Edge of Eternities because the set will have been out for a while. But here in this case, the set's been out for 3 days. So it's kind of like, what is the online metagame? Kind of what are people thinking about the set before we start our pod drafts, right? So we're talking about commons and uncommons that are building upwards. So the 2/1 that makes a 1/1. Sacrifice make a 0/1, 1/1 that gets value, white aura sight. So we're all talking about, we're building up, right? So card advantage plus being on the board. With Resentful Revelation being a small exception there. We're talking that removal is working well, like Sephiroth's Intervention. It's been a while since 4-mana destroy creature, do a little something has been that great, but it is performing well. And we're also noticing that a lot of the rarest mythics, so that was commons uncommons, but a lot of the rarest mythics at 7 mana or more are performing well. So there's a lot of 1-mana cards, and there's some 8-9-mana cards you can play that are doing well. So what's up with that, right? But the important part is that it's mostly color balance as we start, right? We see red showing some weakness, especially in red-green. But red can still find a home. As you know, blue-red even early on had really good data. So, and this is, again, based on those first 3 days. We're talking 10th to 13th of June. This is very, very early. This is the earliest. This is like almost the earliest I would talk about a limited format. So I kind of give like a rough grade to the archetypes online and where we're at, and then indications whether it's a splash or not. But very early on, right? And we're just talking about the basics. We're talking about, you want to be a 2-color deck rather than a 3-color deck. If we're looking at 3-color archetypes, then Sultai seems to be the one that's okay. The others don't really work out because you don't really want to splash in those. So remember, this is about setting context, right? We have a group of 16 people at the house, and I need them to understand as fast as possible what's going on, because it's fine if they make mistakes, but they need to make mistakes in context. They need to kind of, understand, I drafted this. I know it wasn't a recommended archetype, but there's a rare I wanted to try. Like, it needs to be in context. I don't want someone drafting an archetype that they're not supposed to draft. They're like, I just wanted to try red-green. I'm like, but why? And there's no actual explanation. Then that's bad, right? So, like, again, it's context. When we're doing the pod drafts, everything is done in context, even the bad drafts. Then, to do that, I teach them about the archetypes, right? Like, not a huge amount. I just go, this is generally indicators that you want to be in these. So, I'm not going to go through these too much in detail, but, blue-white, we're just talking, like, generically good blue and white cards, mostly built on Boar's Presence. And you'll notice a lot of these cards are white, so, Dragoon's Lance, White Mage's Staff, Magic Thick Armor, right? Dragoon's Wyvern. So all these cards are about building board presence and ideally artifacts. And one of the things that's nice about looking at data is I can avoid the issue of falling into hype. So what I mean by that is you could look at a card like Gallicat, the 1 free Vigilance Flyer for 2 and a white, that becomes a free with 2 artifacts, right? You'd be like, this is a blue-white card, right? Or Tidus or whatever, which is way worse. And a lot of people are like, this would indicate blue-white. And actually, when you look at the information and the data, I realize, no, that's not true. It's these other commons that are key, and it's a more white-based deck. It's just that Gallicat might come to you later, but like, it's not a signal post common. It's not a reason to be in the archetype. It's kind of a sub-reward for being in it. Those distinctions are kind of important to avoid people overdrafting archetypes they shouldn't be drafting, because we're trying to test for a metagame that is going to take place a week from the start of the pod house drafts, right? So like, we have to emulate because people will figure this stuff out, and if they don't, it's mistakes on their side, right? But people will figure this stuff out. So I need them to draft as other people will in a week, so that they can be a week ahead of the metagame, right? Because if they don't draft as other people would at the Pro Tour, that we're always behind. It has to be relevant to the tournament we're doing. If we ever get Spotlight Series and Limited, it's the same thing. You have to prepare for what people are probably going to do, and then react as a consequence. Yeah. So then we go through it. So, defining cards in blue, white, blue, black, red, black. We just go through it. Green, red. So, I think green, white, by the way, was a sign that things might not be very good with this archetype because there was no specific reason. There was no archetype here. It's just stuff. So as a result, stuff decks tend to not be good as time moves on, right? Because data is a representation, especially early in a format, of the color balance based on the rares and mythics in a set. So, because people early on in a set will tend to play the mythics and rares they have, so they will tend to stick more to their color pairs, right? So to certain archetypes. So the data you see is based on the strength of the rares and mythics in a set on average. There are some differences. Sometimes you have insane commons, but most of the time that's what happens. So green-white, not a very good archetype. We'll get into it later. But, you wouldn't be able to identify that right away. You'd have to wait a few drafts and the pod draft metagame to go, well, why am I in green-white? Well, probably because of these rares and mythics that are good. And these good cards are drying up, so what's left? And there's no kind of salvage for green-white. There's no, bottom-of-the-barrel stuff that works. So that's why it's a pretty rough archetype to draft at, a Pro Tour. Whereas online, it's fine. So, yeah. So the important part here is how do I... and the reason I use imagery actually here is it's really important that people get what's going on. I need everybody in that room listening to this, understanding what is going on. The biggest challenge of this isn't so much finding the information. This is all super easy information to find. If you go on 17 lands, draft review stuff, just read on the format, you can understand roughly what's going on. The trick of all this is I have 16 people and I need them to understand what's going on. So my biggest challenge and the biggest level up here, right, for you if you're trying to test with a team on draft and limited in general, is how do I make sure that the people in the room listening understand so we have a common basis to evolve into the next week of the metagame, right? How do I make sure they understand the metagame that's currently existing in limited so that by the time they go to the competition, we're ready for it. We're already at that level above. Dissemination and understanding of information is my actual challenge. So we go to black, white, green, black. You'll notice as well, the green archetypes are kind of interesting. One will go. I'll talk about that in a bit, and why a few of our team ended up in green is because when you look at this, right, it's pretty dense. When you look at blue-green, it's a very dense archetype, especially early on. Blue-green was very kind of replaceable cards. So one thing that became clear very quickly in our drafts is the green decks can kind of capture this huge swath of cards, which is really important comparing online drafts where people, again, take a rare or mythic and run with it, and Pro Tour drafts where people try to draft the best deck possible with the stuff that they are delivered, right? So not the same, and you're in pod, you're facing other people with cards that are open within your packs. So very different perspectives. What you're getting online like this is maybe not going to match, so we're going to get into that. Then we get blue-red, kind of a straightforward archetype, just worked. Blazing Bomb will become more important. This is, again, a preliminary, so I don't focus. One of the things that's important in preliminaries is I'll highlight Blazing Bomb here, and I'll highlight You're Not Alone for blue-white. I like highlighting a little bit, but not too much, cards that go very late, but are powerful within archetypes. The reason I do that is, and this is a judgment call, is, some cards go really late online that shouldn't. So the question is, at the Pro Tour, where do I think things will land at, right? So if I think a card like You're Not Alone, I look at something like You're Not Alone, people are probably not going to draft that card aggressively. So I do like highlighting it in blue-white as you're getting this as a late pickup, because I believe at the Pro Tour that'll also be the case. Blazing Bomb's a little bit that case too, but I wasn't 100%. So it's about, I don't want people in our pod drafts at home at the testing house overvaluing these hidden archetype cards early on, because we're trying to understand how the pod metagame works in situations. So if they're already pre-warping the metagame by draft 1, we're in trouble. I want them to understand the metagame of the Pro Tour. I don't want them being 2 weeks ahead. So I need to make sure they understand enough to create the simulations we need, but not too much so that they start going overboard. And that's also, again, a balancing act. Then, yeah, red-white. This is another thing, right? Red-white's a good archetype, but very few cards that make you want to go into it. It's just Katana and Lance are so good. Then I usually talk about this, the single card look-in. So this is specifically looking at cards that I believe will teach us a lot about the format, or we're not 100% sure about. So Torgal was emblematic of kind of multicolored green decks. It became clear that some of the multicolored green decks could exist, but not many. So it was a question, what would that shell look like? Shinra Reinforcements had a really good win rate for what that effect kind of reads. So the question was, why? Like, you know, we know it's good in black, green, and blue, green, black, right? I can see that in the data. But why? What is enabling? Like, what are we trying to do around this, right? Like, Town Greeter's just 2 mana, very powerful. Blue, black's trying to be valuable. So, like, what are we... why is Shinra Reinforcements good, and why is Sahagin good as well on blue, black, blue, red are important. That's the problem, is why are these cards good? Not they are good, but why? Because it's a little counterintuitive. I'll also highlight weird rares and mythics or uncommons that, like, we're not sure. So, like, Mythic's Mastery was the one. It was worth trying out for this. I think, like, in Strixhaven, it was such a bomb that it's worth seeing how it works. The answer turns out it's a pretty powerful card, but it just doesn't work as well as in Strixhaven. You have less spells. A lot of the spells care about the amount of mana you spend on them. So, like, if you have Sahagin, you played 1/8, and that's it. So it turned out to be good, but not, like, completely broken as it was in Strixhaven. But, anyways, that's the context, right? It's like, I want them to sit down for their first draft and understand, even if they haven't drafted yet, roughly what the format's about. Like, what the archetypes look like, what the archetype strength is. I want them to sit down at their seat and not feel lost. That's the whole goal of this preliminary presentation. It's, no matter where you are at in Limited, you kind of get an idea of what to do. Now, that's, again, emulating the online metagame at the time, all that stuff. Okay. So, as a result, I always do at the end of the preliminary an objectives list. You know, I search a mission, searching a mission statement for the format. So this is, what is the Final Fantasy draft format about? I always put that and figuring out pod draft dynamics, because those are always objectives for a Pro Tour. We're always drafting in pod. Data doesn't represent pod draft. We're always looking for a mission statement, because I want everybody from the testing team to sit down, open their pack, and know what they're doing. So from there, the pod draft dynamics, I go like, okay, well, you know, online you could avoid red. Let's say red was really bad, right? You could avoid red online. That's not hard. Pod draft, not necessarily true. So, like, the question is, what does the red seat position look like? Like, what are we looking for? What's going to get me into it, etc. Then something interesting is, like, you know, the curves. The goes from 1 to 9. Something unique about this set is, how do you determine you want to be, like, low to the ground, high up? Like, what's the kind of angle? Talking that do archetypes have multiple versions? Like, that's something that data doesn't necessarily reflect. Are cards that can be good in one variant of an archetype but not another. Thinking about the multi-green positions, you know, Teamer, Sultai, etc. Like, why would I fall into these? Like, what is going to make me go into them? And then finally, the makeup of a deck, right? So something important in pod draft. Some sets are a little more dense, so it's not too much a problem to fill up the deck. Some sets are a bit less dense. So, like, what cards 18 to 23 look like is much more important. Final Fantasy is very much a card 18 to 23 set, because the low end of your cards can be really punitive when you choose the wrong ones, and you don't have a lot of room for maneuver generally in pod draft. So for this set, very important that we figured out, well, how do I make sure the lower half of my deck is solid? And then obviously remind people that, like, you know, even though we look at card evaluations, they change. All right. Before I move on to kind of like the meat one, like the main presentation before the Pro Tour, are there questions on, like, kind of from anybody here on, like, the preliminary side, the kind of the setup, like, what am I trying to accomplish with this? If it's clear, we can just move on. And feel free as well to, like, ask questions. This isn't like a presentation. This is like, it would be on VOD, but it's I mean, if you see a live stream, you can ask. All right. I'll move on, but if you have questions, we can do that stuff. All right. So before we move on to like the kind of main side, the important part at this point is, at this point we've done 6, and I'd like 8, but like because of how the scheduling works, it's not really possible in this case. Like the two, like, you know, Saturday, Sunday, Monday we did the drafts. Tuesday I needed some time to make this presentation, so this was all done in one day from those drafts. And then Wednesday I present, and then we have some extra drafts. So the important part about this is, let's talk about the drafts, right? So the way a draft happens for us in the testing house, pretty much all but the last one, is the first thing that's important for me is accuracy, right? What are people going to draft like at the Pro Tour? I'm finding people make mistakes that are conscious, right? Like I took this card over this to try it, or I wasn't sure, or whatever. I'm fine with that. That's not a problem. It's always in context. But like I want to make sure, like, if people aren't sure about like a pick between two, they can check the information. We're not on a clock here. Like I'm not like, this isn't an exam or a test. We're trying to recreate the environment, right? At the Pro Tour, people will be ready. They'll have memorized these pick orders. So the thing is, it's a hassle to tell somebody, oh, you can't check. So I actually encourage people to study and check the information, to ask questions. Honestly, if we have people birding and they're not sure, like, I like having members of the team with more experience, or even ones who have a bit less but are curious, to interact, chat, as long as they're not disrupting the actual draft in terms of like letting the neighbors know what's up. So the core thing, right, is I want to make sure that people are drafting in a way that they feel comfortable, and they won't be comfortable the first couple of drafts in the pod. So not everybody will. So like I actively encourage the help. So then we have everybody playing their matches. We play all the Swiss rounds. This is actually super important. The difference between 1-2 and 0-3 at a Pro Tour is really high. You're talking Worlds invites, you're talking next PT invite, like making day 2, which can like literally make or break your Pro Tour, or Pro Tours. Like, because of how AMP systems work, not making day 2 is a huge disaster. So the difference between 0-3 in a draft and 1-2 in a draft, very, very high. So I'm very intent on playing all the Swiss rounds, including the 2 at 0-2, because we need to know the difference between a deck that was maybe a bit unlucky, maybe some things were missing, and a true disaster. Like, it's important when we do the reviews, which I'll get to, that the true disasters are highlighted so that people avoid making those mistakes, right? Obviously, there's always going to be a 0-3 at the table, and half of the people will go 1-2, right? But the key difference is, you know, okay, you won 1-2, but your deck might have been able to do better. The games are the games. Or no, actually this was a disaster. Like, this was an 0-3 or deck. So how we do that, right, is we have to play all the rounds. So often in these testing houses, I will have somebody who wants to give up, right? They're 0-2, they don't feel like playing. I get it. But that is disruptive to the process. Because when somebody doesn't play all their rounds, we don't get that information. And when we don't get that information, it's a loss of quality. And that loss of quality can affect the people struggling the most. So that's part of one thing is, personally for me, at every testing house I'm in, I like an 100% success rate on matches played. Like all the matches are played. This house wasn't that. Not too many got dropped, like maybe 2 or 3 tops. Actually there was one draft, 3 to 4. And because it's problematic to not do this, because then we don't learn essentially what's going on, right? Like, I think it's super important to learn that and to be able to teach. So when that match is removed from the equation, that 0-2 match, it's a lost teachable moment. So that's why it's important. So like, and with the draft reviews, the other thing, right? You play all the matches. There's the 3-0, the 2-1s, the 1-2, the 0-3s. Traditionally, we start with a 3-0 review, and then we go around the table. So one of the things with the reviews is everybody at the end lays their deck down at the table. They lay it down per seat, so that everybody else who wasn't in the draft or was in the draft can see the decks around. They can go like, oh, the green-blue drafter, the red-black drafter, the white-red, oh, another white-red drafter. What happened there? Right? So, like, they can see the seats, and they can start to understand the draft dynamics. And when they start talking about the picks or seeing the picks, they can understand, oh, I see how this happened. The perspective of seeing the whole drafts at a table sat down is what's really important. One thing I'd improve for next time is having the picks ready. So one thing is we lay out the decks. And one thing we added for this house that was great, I think, was I pre-interviewed kind of everybody who did the draft. So I went like, okay, what did you draft? Cool. What was your gameplay like? Highlights, lowlights. And then I'll give them constructive criticism for them. And then lessons that I think are beneficial for the group, positive or negative, I will highlight. And if it's negative, I'll reassure the person, look, this isn't me dissing you. This is just me saying, like, you did this action. This is what happened. And I think it's important that everybody learns from it. So, I will highlight it. Just be aware. So I let them know in advance that a mistake they did is highlighted. So this way, we do a 2-minute opening for me, 3 minutes per deck, 2-minute close. Like half an hour maximum. It actually turned out to be a bit lower, which was even better. But yeah, the improvement I would make on the draft decks is to lay out the first pick, so like 1 to 7, like kind of as a, so that like, because we've lost a lot of time with people going like, pick 1 was this, pick 2 was this, and pick 3, I don't know, was this. So it's better to, I think, line up the picks so that we can discuss them more directly, and if they're not too important, people can just see them, right? Like visually. Visualization is really important. That's why you lay out the decks, that's why you have the conversation, and that's why I have the players storytell. So, we have an upgrade coming. I'm going to snooze it. 5 minutes, that's not great. We'll make it work. Okay. So, we do the draft reviews, and then everybody learns from those. And then we'll do that a bunch of... So, every draft is like that. Every draft is meant with purpose. But again, the mathematics of it are that one person presents, right, out of the 8. Now, the other people at the table might have an idea how the deck operated, right? Especially the opponents. The people who weren't drafting don't know at all. So they're watching this, right? So one story is getting propagated to 15 other competitors. You do that again in C2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Individual stories, but fundamentally, it's being listened by 15 individuals, and it's giving 15 pieces of actionable advice. So by doing one pod draft with 8 people, the amount of lessons and storytelling we get are closer to 100 drafts. Like there's some loss in quality of information playing the games, etc. But we're talking about a massive multiplicative effect. So it's really important. Andrea actually qualified the draft experience as like the religious moment. It's a ritual. You have to be there. Because by not being there, you lose like 10 to 15 drafts worth of information. So like by not showing up, that information is just lost and wiped. So it's really important for me that the draft reviews include everybody. It's out of all the moments at the house, like it's the one moment where I insist that everybody shows up, and I strongly insist in your own limited for the Pro Tour and big tournaments. The draft review is the moment where everyone shows up. No one goes away. It's better to delay the draft review by half an hour, whatever it is, to make sure everybody is ready, but you get it done with everyone there, and it's super important they're there. Critical. Because, I mean, 1 or 2 people missing who weren't in the draft, it's on them, but, like, it's super important for cohesion, learning, understanding, and improvement. Each time one person doesn't show up to a draft review, that's essentially 8 absorptions gone. So it's like that person lost 8 drafts. Now, every individual's responsible, but then that individual is going to interact in future drafts, and when they're in the next draft, they're not going to have learned the lessons from the previous one, so they're hurting everybody in the process and in the chain. One person's not too bad, but you have 3 or 4 like that, then your drafts are no longer representing the Pro Tour metagame and what we're trying to accomplish. This is why the reviews are important. And I think one of the things is that discipline is really important. We actually, we're relatively chill with the Worldly Counsel team on a lot of stuff. To be honest, but the one thing we're not is on speaking too much during a draft review or not paying attention, because it's too disruptive and too important. And it's a way for us to get a lot of valued information. And I'm giving this huge segue on the draft reviews. because I think it's critical, because I've heard other teams do them, and I've heard various reports. You can't mess around with them. Like, if somebody doesn't show up to a draft review, that hurts the whole team. So you got to ask yourself that question. Do I accept that this person is going to harm the team? Now, again, one person's not too bad, and I actually think it's important in each draft to have one or two people who are trying really weird stuff, don't pay attention to data, etc., because it does add authenticity to the draft process to have people who aren't like versed in all the information. So it's not like I'm trying to align everybody 100%, but I'm trying to align most of us, because most people at the PT, especially for draft 2, will know what's up. So you need to be paying attention to that. So like if I have, say, half the people not showing up for a draft review, let's say I didn't have the people who draft, only the people who drafted do the review. That's an insane loss of information, and then we create a lot of issues down the line. So that's why everybody shows up for the draft review. It's about information absorption and implementation. All right, so I was gonna like start on this, but I have this incoming ad break in 2 minutes. So if you have questions about like the draft review process, this is a great time. Pretty sure nobody is subscribed or should subscribe. Save your money for other streamers, please. So if you had questions about the draft review, this is a great time. And then otherwise, I'll just let the ad play for like the minute. Actually, I'll let the ad play. Think about your questions. You're on VOD, so I'm just letting you know this is my mom, so I'm letting her know I can't be another. Alright, so that's done. But yeah, if you're watching this on VOD, I know it seems like insisting on the point of like showing up, but and it seems like a little bit excessive, but it's so critical. Like every time I see, so yeah, you're actually unfortunately gonna get another ad break in 15 seconds, but this is disabling pre-roll, so it's not a bad thing. I'll see you all in 10, but I'm just doing some messaging during the VOD stage. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See you in a bit. So yeah, the big thing, right, is a lot of the limited processes are actually things that are known, and they have been known for over 10 years. But if the team doesn't have the discipline for them, there's nothing you can do to kind of set up, right? Because the whole all of the mathematics of it are based on presence, attention, and implementation. So when people don't show up, when they don't level up, when they don't learn, they are harming everybody. Now, this isn't absolute. It's fine to have somebody not there. You know, somebody's arriving later in travel. Somebody's got something on the evening. It's not like I have to have everybody there every time. But, you know, 1, 2 out of 16 isn't a problem. But if I start having like half the people not there, like, what are we doing? We're not learning. We're as much. So that's kind of the important lesson is making sure that you are learning, right? And that everybody is learning. And when somebody doesn't show up, they are harming future learning. So, you know, that's the advantage you get from testing with a house, is the presence of people. So if the people don't show up, what's the point? All right, we're back. Cool. All right, let's dive into the meat presentation. So this presentation is whenever there's, trust me, when the Pro Tour comes up, when the PDQ comes up, when a tournament in that limited format comes up, this is the thing I get asked by ex-teammates, current team, like friends, etc., all the time. This is the presentation I need to succeed in my tournament. Can you please send this to me? I get asked about these presentations for sealed deck, which is so irrelevant that I literally tell them it's not worth it. But I do send in, like, for some people, like, if the draft is there, because the deadline is generally the second draft of the Pro Tour, by which time, for most people, I can give it to them by that point. It's very utilitarian. One of the things I liked a lot about MagicCon Las Vegas was being invited on the Lords of Limited panel, and you can check that out on their YouTube channel. Because they and the audience were interested not so much in the findings as they were in the process. And when you're going to listen to this, please be interested in the process, not the findings, because the findings are probably out of date, and they probably won't apply even if there were a draft arena open, which are unscheduled, but if there was one, this may not apply. This is a strategy that made sense for the Pro Tour and made sense for a pod draft format. So listen to the process so that you can learn about that. And again, for Edge of Eternities, you'll have to change it a bit, because if you're qualified to that Pro Tour, simply because there's going to be 7 weeks of metagame updates. So you don't analyze a 7-week-old limited format the same way you analyze a 1.5-week-old limited format. Totally different metagames. The same way Week 1 Standard and Week 7 Standard aren't the same thing. But people treat Week 7 Limited like Week 1 Limited more often than in Constructed. So you need to be aware of that, be aware of those biases, and try to find a balance between people who are using information that's out of date, people who are using in-date information, and how to balance that in your draft. That's actually a really complicated task, so I'll be aiding with that for Edge of Eternities. But, alright, Final Fantasy Limited 4. I didn't even fix PT Chicago. PT FF. There we go. Fixed it. All this time later. Alright. So, again, I always start with a mission statement. And for me, this time was keep the mana flowing. So one of the things with the mission statements, right, is I try to find a way to define the format that is in line with what a lot of people see, but isn't necessarily seen. It's like, if you combine 3 or 4 reviews of the limited format, you might be able to narrow down this, but generally it's a little off, right? People aren't quite there, and I try to, like, keep it on, like, what is the format about? And in this set, right, it's about card flow and curve flow. It's turn 1. The answer on the curve turn 1 to 9 is, actually, you can kind of just do it. You can just go from 1 to 9. But to do it, you need to play cards that drive that advantage. So, usually I also have a small meme, so in this case, I just looked for Final Fantasy mana and had a little bit of fun here, but, you know. So I always start with, like, again, a format definer. So Sirkovis, by the way, great. If you don't follow him for limited content, do, like, straight up. Fantastic. Now, he ranked the kind of color power rankings like this. Now, again, and this was also important in Aether Drift, this is based on the rares and mythics that people are playing more often than not because they're locked onto them. If you did that, you would see that the colors are really balanced. In Aether Drift, the green rares and mythics often were completely stupid. So they were the most likely ones to lead to great win rates. So people thought, oh, green is so strong, but then when you looked at the commons, it was like Scurryfoot and everything else was actually not what it was cracked up to be. So green wasn't actually as strong in Aether Drift as people thought, which gave us a huge edge because while you could draft green, and Andrea 6-0'd in Chicago with green, but Andrea opened rares and mythics in green. The rest of our team didn't. So they didn't fall in the trap of the commons from green and drafted the right archetypes. Why did I say that? It's because we're going to go again into this kind of adapted color strength and draft. Silesian was actually something I changed to a D last minute. Once I realized, we'll go into that. But, like, it's kind of my grade. Because I kind of do a high-level summary here before we dive in. But now the order of these slides is, like, something I could play with. Feedback's always welcome there, too. But, like, I try to, like, start with the macro, right? What is all about this, and then, like, you know, making more and more specific as we go on. So in this case, I found that, like, Dimir, Rakdos, Izzet, and to a degree Golgari were, like, kind of the A archetypes. But frankly, most archetypes were played. It was just Gruul and Selesnya had trouble. So this was my thesis for the format. Again, an FF6 reference. Again, please, if you understand this reference, go see a doctor. Now, essentially, the thing we found, right, when doing the set, is the depth in the kind of Grixis colors was a lot higher. Like, a lot of the playable cards were coming a lot later than in the other archetypes. So it ended up that was the conclusion. It wasn't that Grixis was the strongest color. It was that if you did end up in Grixis, you did have a lot of backup commons to help you. So from there, usually in the process, I go, okay, this is the thesis, right? How does the set work? What are we trying to do? So here's the thing, right? The aggressive decks can build a board, but it's hard to push damage often. There's not a ton of evasion. There's a lot of good removal that can leverage a lot of defensive good. Remember Sahagin, remember Shinra reinforcements. Those 1-frees and 2-frees, 2-free gaining life, makes pushing damage hard. It's actually not easy for the aggressive decks to push damage. So as a result, because the board stalls a little more, it's hard that means cards can shine individually. So individual cards become strong, but then removal for those strong cards also is strong, right? Like if somebody plays a good card and you can remove said good card straight up, then that's probably a reasonable exchange for you. So as a result, the mana curve, flashback, mana sinks that allow that full use of mana from turns 1 to 10 plus are what matters, because all your cards are generating incremental value, including graveyard filling, so all of this is much better. And compared to, say, MH Free, it's value over engine. It's actually really hard to get a proper engine in Final Fantasy Limited. It's hard to... That's why cards like Laboratory Maniac or the Crystals don't work, is because those are kind of engine cards in the sense of like... an example of an engine would be, I have a deck that will guarantee me getting to the Water Crystal, and I will use the Water Crystal to win the game straight up. That doesn't work. That doesn't pan out in practice when we're playing the set. It's also why the Earth Crystal isn't good, is you're trying to generate value and card advantage and card flow over time. The engine doesn't really get together. All your cards are just doing things. So, that means that, you know, if you have a 1-drop or a 3-drop that is getting stronger over time, well, that's a high value pick, right? Anything that's 1 or 2 mana, but is also doing something on top, great card. So the theory, right, is you want your decks to build position as you keep casting spells, applying pressure on both board and development as you go, while disrupting the higher quality cards from your opponent. Notice that out of this, there's not a description of which color to draft. There's not a description of which cards to take specifically. It's all about, I sit down at the draft table. What am I trying to do in this format? Like, so the average competitor might go like, oh, I need to draft an aggressive deck in this seat. What I'm trying to do here is going, a player on my team, sitting down goes like, the aggressive deck is in my seat. I need to draft evasion and or ways to punch in damage because that's not going to be easy off the offset. So I'm going to need an aggressive deck because I got Samurai's Katana and Dragoon's Lance, and not because I got a bunch of 2/2s for 2. That's the difference when you're sitting down, is you understand what you're trying to do. So when you don't remember card pick orders, you're going to take the cards that make sense in the plan. Then we talk about the pod draft metagame, right? We're talking, you know, I'm talking about here the initial balance, right? That the rares and mythics are powerful, they're carrying colors, various archetypes. But if you value the commons correctly, you have an imbalance towards the Grixis color pairs because they have more depth. Again, this is pod draft. Arena online drafts, you'll probably get enough playables in your seat. Whereas at a pod table, that's harder, but the Grixis color pairs have more depth. So as a result of being in one of those free archetypes, you're more likely to be able to fill up your deck. Now, I talk about, this set is kind of interesting that you have to read your signal and your table at the same time. Now, the thing is to kind of send small scouts, so things like Blazing Bomb are a good indication. Like, you know, if a Blazing Bomb doesn't come back, that's probably a sign that somebody's doing something correctly at your table. You know, Sahagin probably wouldn't, but that's an interesting thing. Are you getting Resentful Revelation pick 9? Like, what is coming back to you, right? Because if like all the great stuff is coming back to you no cost, then you're like, oh, okay, I can take more speculative picks. I don't need to force like a 2-color deck right now. There's a bunch of stuff. Let me check that this is making a better layout. Cool, more space. Sorry. So reading the table is important because then you know how hard it is to fill like the bottom end, right? A table that's a little quote unquote weaker will give you late playables very late, so you don't need to force like a 2-color pair. You can be in like all 3 colors and then pick 2 later. Whereas at a more difficult table where the stuff isn't coming back, you have to, plant your stake earlier and go like, okay, I need to go into, say, blue-black. I can't finagle. So, like, now that said, again, depth, spell-based decks are going to be better than creature-based decks, which means that, interestingly, aggressive decks can work. Spell-based decks can work. But what does that leave out? It leaves the mid-range anti-aggro decks a little bit having a rough time, right? If I have cards that cost a lot and are good against aggro, they might have a bad time. Because my opponent has a removal spell for that, and I am way down. This Migrating Ketradon, the Aether Drift All-Star Green card, not very good in this set. You'll see about the replacement here. Now, in the pod draft metagame, I talk about the leverage. And the leverage for me on this one is read your table on your best chance to get high equity 5th to 9th plus pick cards for your deck. In Aether Drift, it was actually about the wheel. It was specifically don't bother with the signal of what's being passed to you as much and bother about what the table is telling you. Because you can get pick 9, 10, 11, 12 cards that are very valuable for your archetype. Whereas in Final Fantasy, there's not that many that goes that late. So you have to kind of do it a bit earlier. Now, I talk about pod draft dynamics. This is generally the only one where I would talk about color. I always think in terms of archetypes for limited. You shouldn't think in terms of color ever. You should think mostly in terms of archetypes, because there's a metagame and there are at least 10 decks. Cons at 5, 6-ish. Most formats have 10, maybe 12 if you have some free color decks, but essentially you're drafting a deck. You're not drafting a color. So the only reason to think about color is about positionment. It's not about how do I like blue-white, I like blue-red. I like blue as a result. That's not how it works. It's, okay, I drafted these blue cards because those were the correct picks in my position, and they work in these 2 archetypes. Or maybe they don't. Maybe I drafted 5 blue cards and 3 of them are great in blue-red. 1 is good in all blue decks, and 3 are great in blue-red and blue-black. 1 is great in all blue, and 1 of them is fantastic in blue-white. And I'm like, well, probably playing blue, but more likely blue-red, blue-black, because these cards are fitting in these 2 decks better than they fit in the other one. So I'm not in blue, I'm in an archetype. So as a result, when I get that, I don't have a blue card, what do I take? This white, black, red card? I don't know. Well, I can go back, fend back my picks in my mind and go like, I'm in this archetype. And that's what I'm trying to teach. So pod draft dynamics, being open or closed, it really depends on what you got. Generally, because the set has good rares and mythics, the stronger the cards you have, the more closed you should be. The weaker the setup you have, the more open you should be. Now, I do say that they consider any archetype. I do point out that green, white, green, red are a bit the weakest. I think I actually like green, red a little bit by the end, because it's one of the few archetypes where you get, like, powerful commons nobody cares about, like +3/+3 and trample. So anyways, because of a good number of high-value rares, mythics, and commons, low rarity start will generally choose a primary color in Pack 1, and decide a secondary during Pack 2 and Pack 3 as a likely behavior, because again, you might open a powerful uncommon, you might get a powerful rare, so it's nice to have the option. And by being in a single color, it's easier to do this. By being in 2 color, you close yourself down on those avenues. Then I talk about that signals from your immediate neighbor are important because of non-green cards not being applicable to all the green decks, right? Like, a red card doesn't work in all the red archetypes. Even Thunder Magic is fine in red-white, but it's not like at the time really what he wanted. Call the Mountain Chocobo in blue-red, black-red, and even green-red to a degree, exceptional. But in white-red, almost not playable. So, like, very important to understand that stuff. And there's a little bit of intuition that people have, even if they're not super prepared for Limited at the Pro Tour. They do have a small understanding of what they want within their 2-color pair. But yeah. And then combining with table signals, right? Are you seeing, in this case, good Grixis card blue? So now I talk about a positioning example. So each person is responsible for what they do when they play, right? I can't force somebody to play correctly. Or some people cannot retain all the information, right? Like they go like, I can't remember the evaluation of 300 individual cards because it's too much. Like, I think the limited meeting that lasts 6 hours and everybody learns about every card in the full context is just too much. Frankly, like, I can't implement that information to them in the amount of time we have. If they're interested, 17 lands exists for that card evaluation exercise. I can answer questions. but I always give cards in context as much as I can. Like, there are some examples in a vacuum, but for the most part, I try to talk about cards in the context of archetypes, not in the context of just a vacuum. So anyways, I talk about the positioning example for, I think you should always draft what your seat tells you to draft, no matter what the set is. In A for Drift, where most of our team drafted Mardu colors, the reason for that wasn't, oh, Mardu's great. It was probably the correct position in most of them because people were undervaluing those colors. So as a result, you got more equity being in those colors on average. That's why they drafted it, not because, again, I drafted green because you got the mythics and rares for it. So again, it's about, you sit down, what are you trying to do? I never advocate forcing. I think I did it once and it was a disaster. So since then, I never advocate forcing. I always go like draft the open seat. However, a positioning example is what I think the open seat might be at the Pro Tour, or at the PDQ top 8 or whatever it is, compared to what I think the metagame is. So in this case, I'd say a positioning example is you can choose to prioritize the Grixis colors due to them being high depth archetypes, right? So you can go sit down on your pack and you're like, well, in a vacuum, I guess Grixis would make the most sense. So, like, I would rather have a Grixis rare or mythic to start. That'd be great. Obviously, in free archetypes, right? Blue, black, black, red, and blue, red. But, again, that's a preference. That's not what they should do. But anyways, so I talk about that. I say you're willing to pivot to alternative archetypes based on opening certain res or mythics. If you open Dion, like, you should probably play white to some degree. Then Pack 1, priority, check for wheels, take mana fixing for conditional opens, over low quality playables, right? You want to increase the chances of Pack 2 and Pack 3 power rather than having very weak cards. And then, again, try to stick to one color because there's a lot of great multicolor cards in the set, so you want to stay open for that. Then, the wheels might tell you a story. Maybe you think, oh, these 6 cards will wheel and this really powerful one came back. So that tells you, oh, yeah, this is going to be a nice Grixis draft. No problem. Like one of the free archetypes are actually, it's really weird that none of these came back. This came back, though. I got to be careful. And then, try to evaluate cards, right? If you think there's more spell-based decks at your table, then something like Syncopate is better because it disables flashback. The exile clause is important. You might have picked 11 or 12, exile 2 cards from a graveyard, free 2. You get it for free. Might want it a bit more because, more people are going to be graveyard based. This one is also new. I usually give a warning sign for newer players because not everybody's necessarily versed in the mathematical theory of limited. So I talk about the fact that mulliganing to 6 in limited is really bad. Like 12 is maybe excessive. I'd say more 10. But, you don't want to mulligan in limited. It's horrible. It's not constructed. Your cards don't have... exceptions to this tend to be when your deck has a very high disparity in card quality and when your best cards are opening hand cards. So, for example, if your deck has the card Ragavan or Saz's Chocobo, mulliganing is better because you want one of these opening hand cards, so your deck is filled with cards that are weaker drawn. So, your win rate kind of balances out on it. The reason I talk about this is talking about those cards 8 to 23 here, right? So you look at Summon Chocobo Mog. I think this was in blue-white. Yeah, so I added the U here. So, the free saga. What we care about here, if you don't know Sentient Lands data that well, is that last number, this minus 3.7 PP, right? So it means that, if the average blue-white deck drawing the card Summon Chocobo Mog loses 3.7% on its win rate. Now, this is imperfect because blue decks draw more cards, so the win rates of decks with card draw tend to not show this, and aggressive decks tend to lower. But that's a lot. You only need free cards like this to have been drawn in your game to effectively have mulligan to 6. So that's the trick here, right? As I'm trying to remind them, you really need to know the low end of your pick order because your last cards need to at least fit purpose, need to at least not be too bad, because otherwise 2 or 3 or 4 cards like this and you've essentially mulliganed to 6. Alright. Then after this, I usually go into the pack 1 value up. I try to put some memes for Levite to help learning. So, I talk about engine cards, generically good cards, there's nothing too surprising here, but I think it's important in pack 1. People are a little lost on what they should do. I think the value should be up on the generically powerful stuff. And then packs 2 and 3 are when you dive into the specifically powerful, right? So pack 1 is about the generic, and pack 2 and 3 are about the specific. I also talk about the green and Grixis towns because multicolor green, and then all the free Grixis 2-color archetypes might want to splash a bomb like Kuja or Kefka if you're super lucky into their 2-color deck. So like in pack 1 where the cards are weaker, you're more likely to want to pick up one of these mana fixing lands. Yeah, so one of the things I do is I look at every card on Tuesday. That Tuesday, I sat down, I put my headphones, I put a playlist saying top 100 Final Fantasy songs of all time the last 8.5 hours, and I looked at every single card in the set. All of the data with it. I looked at its data history. I looked at how it changed. I looked at every archetype. And the reason I do that is because I don't want the rest of the team doing it. It is a time-consuming task. However, if I do it, let's call it 8 hours, right? Maybe 9. If I ask the teammates to do it, if I ask the whole team to do it, to even study the data close to what they should, we're talking 3 to 5 hours per person. So like I'm increasing the time I study, but I make it so that the time that the team has to study is vastly reduced. Because if we do this is already too long in a presentation. This is one of the things I want to learn how to dial down the amount of content to increase the amount of learning. So, if I have a 6-hour discussion / limited meeting, the information retention is terrible because that's how it is theoretically. Like, if you just look at how psychology, how the brain works, all that stuff, you know that like trying to do a 6-hour seminar is not the best way for learning. So what we do is, that's why we do the draft reviews. It disseminates the information over time. Somebody learning about a draft review in 25 minutes to 30 minutes, very digestible. So we do that. Instead of having one massive 6-hour meeting, we do a few 30-minute reviews. And then we do a summary of that. And then we have this presentation, which is essentially a summary of the vision, the approach. Because, and again, this isn't a slight on any teammate, but like if I discuss a card and I invite feedback on a card, maybe nobody talks about it, but think about it: 300 cards, let's say 2 minutes a card on average, maybe a minute and a half. 300 minutes already is 5 hours, right? So let's say a minute per card is still 5 hours plus discussion on archetypes and all. And that implies that like people are like not taking too much time, etc. I'd rather break it down per archetype. I'd rather do all the insane work and then present it, because they don't need to know everything to perfection. They need to understand roughly where things are at. It's the macro vision and the approach are so much more important than knowing a card is off by 1%. Because usually that card that's off by 1%, even if they get it wrong, it's not that big a deal. And it's more important they think about the basic stuff like mana curve, like how do I apply pressure, like what am I trying to accomplish in the games. That's what I want them to think. I don't want them thinking which card to take every single time. I want them to think, I'm taking this card because it helped my plan. It's a lot easier for pick orders to do that. Going, oh, I know what I need. I need this. I see this. I take this. Not, which card should I take here? I don't know, percent, blah. No. So get them away from the card evaluation. That's my job, to sort through that stuff. Get them straight into the approach. Anyways, this was a fun one because when you look at Selesnia's data set for commons and commons, it's dry like the desert. And then when you look at like every one of the free, the 2-color archetypes and Grixis, just this long, beautiful list of more and more commons you can play. It's great. So anyways, I talk about archetype look-in. So this is the Grixis Shell. So these are cards that I think people rate correctly. So Thunder Magic, Intervention. So these are cards that people play, pick highly, play highly, and correctly so. Then I go into underrated. So the question mark is like, are these really going to be underrated at the Pro Tour? Maybe, maybe not. Things I think like Combat Tutorial won't be, but Sahagin, is that going to be underrated? Side Quest Card Collection, very powerful. Is it coming as late as it does online? Probably not, but how late? Sorcerer Schemes, is it wheeling as it does online, or are you getting a pick 6, 7? Maybe you have to aggressively take a pick free. I don't know. These are cards that are underrated online, but I don't know, if they're going to get it, right? So that's the question is, are they going to understand this? Oh, yeah. So this was funny. My first draft at the house, I drafted this Rakdos deck, and I just could not run out of cards. It had 3 Resentful Revelations, Call of the Mountain Chocobo, Sorcerer Schemes, and at the end of it, I was just like, I can't run out of cards, and that was where a lot of the core theory came from. Is I started paying attention to the decks that went 2-1 and 3-0 in our draft reviews, and it was always about, I can keep cards more and more. Like, they never run out of stuff to do, even the aggressive decks. Because the aggressive deck never runs out of stuff to do because their opponent is dead by the time they might. So, the good ones at least. So, when I looked at Rakdos was a really interesting one because it was the one archetype that was the misbuilt the most. So you can look in 17 lands on a stat called how often do people main deck a card. And I realized a lot of people were main decking cards that were bad, like Summon Anima, and putting too many garbage creatures, so to speak, and not putting enough of the good cards. So a lot of the spells that were even playing at the 65 to 75%. So that was harming the archetype, right? Like Rakdos wasn't performing online, but it turned out the other archetypes were being built relatively correctly, but not Rakdos. So as a result, there was good equity there. It was kind of it's a good archetype that's just poorly ranked. But you'll notice, apart from Garland, this is all removal. Basically, the combo of Schemes and Cornered by Black Mages is what you want. But that's like what makes the archetype tick. Obviously, the other cards are good. Okay, so then we look at cards that make you potentially go into archetypes. So at this point, Gallicat does come up rather than the preliminary. It's because at this point, it's okay, well, what indicates to you that you might want to be in these archetypes? What's coming late that's free and doesn't cost you much? So, again, Gallicat, Slash of Light, you're not alone. And I look at this for a bit. Like, Boros, right? Like, we noticed that Zidane and Gyot were coming super late. So, yeah, there's a Boros deck per table, probably, when those cards are open. But it always came to them. There's almost never 2 Boros drafters. So, this is kind of the nice one. And then we noticed Coral Sword as well, which I think a lot of people missed out on. I looked at Orzhov exclusives, like cards. Orzhov was actually a pretty deep archetype. It didn't do so well at the house, but I think it's because we ended up in Orzhov by having black decks that couldn't get the Grixis colors fall into the white cards, and that was the wrong way to look at it. Whereas in this case, like when you look at these are cards that should come a bit later to you. So it turned out the archetype's actually okay. Maybe a small miss there from us. And then I talk about the green decks, like basically the green multicolor package. So one of the important parts about green that I talk about here is that the record at the house dialed down. So this isn't in the presentation, but we noticed that like as the green deck started being more open, the green drafters results were starting to go down. So essentially, that was actually kind of important, is because in pod draft you want to stay open, right? Most often than not. All the green drafters, instead of being 2-color, were starting to be in this kind of open setup. Like you start with a Fenrir and a Torgal and you're open to anything. But then you still have 3 green drafters on average per table. So they were hurting each other's cards. So nothing that those decks wanted was coming late anymore. So at the start, green was doing well. And then green stopped doing well. And it's because of that effect of all the green decks becoming soup decks. So, and that's something you can only do by taking that approach, again, of simulating the Pro Tour metagame, simulating the Pro Tour approach, and going, well, at a Pro Tour, this is what you would often try to do. I didn't put the link, right? So somebody's looking at the presentation, I think, from the team, which is fine. Well, like all of a sudden you can't draft these soup decks because all the towns aren't coming late because the green towns are highly demanded because, again, the green decks are probably soup decks. Your Cloud of Darkness is in any green deck, so as a result, it's getting picked by all these one of these free green drafters. So you're not ever getting these cards late anymore. It's over. So as a result, it turned out that in drafts, green was very dangerous at the Pro Tour because of this effect. Didn't mean you couldn't draft green, but it meant, you know, you can't, like, the soup deck, that's kind of your insurance, right, against things going wrong, was actually your downfall. Like, a lot of these soup dealing decks were starting to go 0-3, 1-2 compared to the more 2-color leaning decks. And it's because of that approach of trying to protect yourself. So, yeah. That was an important part. Then I talk about, like, some cards that are that don't fill anywhere. Basically, things that are single archetype cards, like most of the white decks are not defensive, so Ultima kind of weirdly without a home, even though it's powerful. Nice of the round for the same reason. The Wandering Minstrel, pretty powerful, but how do you make it work? So again, these are the only cards where I actively tell teammates who are not too comfortable and limited to just be careful on / avoid if they're not comfortable pivoting massively based on what they learned at the house. Because generally at most we'll have 1 or 2 house decks that might run these correctly. So it's really hard to know how to draft these as a result. So like I usually like protect less experienced teammates here. And then there's this, which I normally would do in the approach side, but decided to put this a little later because I wanted them to understand the positioning and draft. But at the house, you know, you're like 21st, 22nd, 23rd card. I know what I'll put, a 2/2 for 2. This is one of the worst sets for a 2/2 for 2. Using spell snares, flavor text, yeah. Basically, it turned out that 2/2s for 2 are terrible. You have 1 freeze, 2 freeze, they gain life, all this bad stuff. As a result, too, because 2/2s for 2 are not good, the decks that are performing don't have them. So, all the cards that are anti-aggressive, like Balam T-Rexor, Dwarven Castle Guard, right? Those cards are losing value. Now, these drops are less bad than in Aether Drift. But essentially, when I was looking at, like, profile, there were so many cards that were losing value when they were anti-aggressive. And you can only figure this stuff out. Like, you can look at the data, but, like, to figure out what you're trying to teach, right, is why is that data showing a downward trend, right? And then when you know the approach, when you know what the format's about, it starts fitting in, right? The stories start making sense of, okay, so all these anti-aggressive cards aren't working because the anti-aggressive deck, the aggressive decks are putting more evasion, so they're dealing with this problem, or there's more spell-based decks who are also dealing with this problem. So the anti-aggressive cards aren't working. So as a result, I give them, like, this I actually tell them to use as a reference. I don't even, in the presentation, go through them too much, but I tell them look at later, and basically all these cards are worse than they would appear at first glance. So it doesn't mean that Cloud of Darkness is bad, but normally Cloud of Darkness is an uncommon bomb. It dials to a good uncommon, right? Dwarven Castle Guard goes from to filler to not really playable. So that's what I mean, is like all these cards like lose a tiny grade in the process, right? So I talk about Sahagin. Actually is interesting because it is a powerful card. People might figure it out, but it does lose a grade. Lionheart becomes worse because you're not killing when people don't run 2/2s for 2. A lot worse of a card, strangely enough. So again, the important part is I'm pointing out that, like, because of the set, come back to this and do one important thing is I usually did this at the top of the presentation. I lowered it. So, like, I moved the presentation to be more about what you need to learn about the approach of the format and less about individual card evaluation. So I give them a chance to ask questions here, but I use this as more a worksheet. So I let them see the presentation after. So, like, instead of having to go on 17 lands, they can just retain less information. Because it's, you know, Approach is difficult. You have to remember constructed, sideboard plans, plans and constructed, limited, draft and limited, or archetypes. It's a lot of information for one tournament. So I like dialing down the complexity to make sure that they're not making mistakes on what matters, and they might make a mistake on something very small, right? It's reduce the mistake quantity on what's important, and don't mind it too much on the lower stuff. Don't discuss too much on smaller end mistakes. So, you know, top cards, so I won't go for this, but, you know, commons, like the top cards, which cards are trapped in the archetype, like which ones are bad. Uncommons the same, and then commons and uncommons. This time what I added, which is, I think, a good add, was I added the depth of the archetypes. So, like, anything in light green was, you know, there's depth. Like, if you're in this archetype, you'll probably find commons that will fill you up. Anything that was in light red was, like, you know, you're probably in this archetype because I'm commons. Like, Orzhov is a great example. Boros is the same, of good archetypes, but, like, you kind of need an uncommon to go in them. And then Deep green, like those are so deep that you can pretty much go eyes closed, and the deep red one of Selesnya is the only reason you're in Selesnya is because you got a bunch of rares. Mythics. So something interesting about the presentation, I split it into kind of these free parts. An ad might start, so we'll run that if needed. I'll be in 3 minutes, but I split it into 2 parts. I split the approach, which is about what I want people to think about when they sit down to draft, and I split the annex, which is the evaluation. I'll go through the evaluation quickly, but basically it's a visualization of these tables. It's just, if you're in Azorius, what's better and what's worse. So, interestingly, all these blue cards, right? Ice Magic, Dreams of Laguna, Syncopate are cards you might take in blue, especially pack 1, but when you take them, you're not in blue-white at all, because they don't fit Azorius, but they fit the other blue archetypes, right? So, this is important so that they don't fall in the archetype trap, which is the, I take a color, I see the second color, I merge them together. No. Don't think in terms of colors, think in terms of archetypes. This is what's helping you, right? So I talk about what's good, what's bad, rare, because this also gives context, right? If I say that Xenos is bad in black-white, but it's a bomb in elsewhere, right? It's like, why is it back in black-white? Well, turns out, probably because I have a lot of small creatures. So it's not going to be very good in archetype with a bunch of small creatures. Well, the cards that are good with small creatures, right? So, Boros, Dimir. So, Dimir and Izzet are interesting. One of the things our house was struggling maybe a bit was understanding when to be in one or the other. And Dimir is very much that 2-spell a turn deck. It's like 2 free, 2+2, or like 2 free, 4, 2+3. So it's very much, I am casting 2 spells in 1 turn style archetype. Whereas the Izzet deck was, I cast 1 spell. So I set up 1, 2, 3, and then I'm like 4, 4, 4. So that was a way to help picture as well how to draft those archetypes. Rakdos was also interesting, right, because of the difference between the creatures and the spells. I skipped Selesnya. I didn't talk about it. I thought it was so bad. This was one of the few times I skip an archetype, but it was correct. Talk about Simic. The Simic doesn't really have any cards to avoid because the color pair is actually kind of deep, but it's a pretty just play the cards you have archetype, so that's why. Golgari, I talk about the difference there again, just generically powerful black large creatures are good. Also Diamond Weapon. Gruul, interestingly, Blitzball Shot, right? That's a super interesting example here. Because we haven't approached it, but this is why it's important to think in terms of archetypes. Is if I think in terms of colors, I'm going to miss a card like Blitzball Shot. Because it's not a good green card, but it's a good green-red archetype card. And you're in green-red for good reason. So if you're in green-red, you're like, oh, I got a bunch of cards that are going to make me go into green-red. Blitzball Shot is going to wheel. You know it's going to wheel, so you know you're getting a playable back. That's important. Ad break's going to start. We'll come back after that for the free color stuff. Cool. So yeah, if you're watching this on VOD again, the important challenge is the memorization, right? It's the reason I take all this time to search card images, put them in there, rather than going here's the data, here's the stats, or laying out, because the alternative ride before was to lay out the cards on a table, which was fine when we didn't know what the card evaluations were, but we're already doing that with the reviews. The presentation is meant as a recap of those reviews and as a consolidation of vision and approach. Yeah. How long does this ad have? It'll tell me. But yeah. So when the ad finishes, I'll be back. I think it's 30 seconds. Hopefully not too long. So yeah, the ad break ends at, oh my god, 1.5 minutes. That's so much. Yeah, so kind of funnily enough, because I was a Twitch affiliate back when I streamed, and now I still am, but I don't stream as much. I don't really want to remove the affiliate side. It's a lot of effort to lose something. But yeah, I always worry about ads on content like this, because you could make it a VOD. But again, right, the approach side here is very much, again, I talked about this on the Lords of Limited panel, is it's really important to think about archetypes and not colors. When you think about colors, you're removing the perspective of a metagame. You're removing the perspective of what your matchups are, what you're trying to accomplish. When you talk about archetypes, archetypes have set missions and goals within them. They're a deck that you're building up, right? So that's why it's important to think always in terms of archetypes. It's the biggest level up in Limited. The second you stop thinking about colors and you start thinking about archetypes, because Wizards is designing sets that way. And when they design sets that way, you better listen. Now, yeah, that's kind of the important lesson. I'm gonna wait for this ad break to finish, and then we'll move on. It's 7 seconds. All right. And we're back. Cool. All right. Sorry for the ads there. All right, so we're back onto Secret Gold cards. So talk about free color cards that are nice. I actually recap, by the way, that any free color deck that has an off-color dual, so like if you're black-red and you're splashing a blue bomb or a card that requires a blue pip, then drawing your dual in that off-color, so like say the black-blue dual in your black-red deck gives you plus 3% win rate. So like it is critical to make this stuff work, right? So that's actually an important stat, is your deck functions at the same win rate as it should, but only if you draft a dual. So like that's why in pack 1 that priority is there. Right, after the Secret Gold cards, I talk about card combos, so things to look out for. Obviously both Gilgamesh's work well with Samurai's Katana. Talking about Xenar Carland is Xenarkant, Ancient Metropolis, an interesting one because it's one of the few cards I would qualify as close to a 1-card engine because it's a land. It's a lot easier to get than a lot of the other cards. Like Town Greeter can get it, World Map. It's a lot easier to get, and with Chocobo Kick, you essentially get to make a large creature, kill something, link a large creature, so you can get like this engine going. So it's kind of an interesting card combo. Talk about card combos are also interesting when I contextualize them to go, you know, these are ways that you can get equity edges with cards that are low equity normally. Like Adventurer's Airship is a card most people miss, but it is really nice with Evil Reawakened. We actually had a really fun game at the house where somebody played against Evil Reawakened with Hecties. So the person just went, discard this big thing, Fenrir, reawaken on turn 4 this Gigantosaurus creature. I can't even remember. And just won the game on the spot. Might have been a Colosseum Behemoth. Like, just made a 9/9 kill something. It was so strong. I'm going to take a small pause here to say that for Edge of Eternity, this is going to be much more important. So for Final Fantasy, these are card combos as we spot them, right? And we don't have exact data. With a late limited set, synergy starts mattering a lot more. So you need to pay attention to that stuff. There are ways to measure synergy, especially week 7 limited. So you're preparing for the Pro Tour. Make sure you know what those synergies are. All right. Another card combo, Salvage's Phantom Train. Then we have the red-black premier combo of Cornered by Black Mage's Sorcerer Schemes, like just super powerful together. It's why Sorcerer Schemes has a much higher win rate in Rakdos, at least originally, is that 2-card combo is so strong. The White Auracite and Restoration Magic are really nice and clean. Restoration Magic actually just a reasonably good card, but that comes late. So having White Auracite with it is really nice because of the adding white mana. So you get to again develop more presence, but being able to double spell, etc. Then we get this card synergy. So one game that Derek played online in our team, he had the UFO. He played with Combat Tutorial, and I was like, wow, this is so good. Against an aggressive deck. Like, just make this 1/5 flying blocker. The problem with card draw is usually you can't develop as fast, so UFO solves that problem. The problem with UFO is you need raw cards. Combat Tutorial solves that problem. And obviously Demon Wall is just good with it. It's also why Demon Wall was specifically good in Black-Blue. Because of that combo. Sometimes if the stats on a card don't make sense with the archetype's logic, like why would Demon Wall be better in Blue-Black? Try to figure out if there's a card combination or synergy. Then I talk about Revelation Esper Ramu. Esper Ramu was not that good, but with Revelation's kind of nice. Same deal. Ramu was pretty poor performer in all the red archetypes, but performed a bit better in black-red, so I was wondering what was going on. Ultros and Ice Magic, I think that one's pretty straightforward. And then I have a second annex, which is card evaluation. So the problem with FF and any bonus sheet set is that everybody, and this is a human problem, not an actual problem, They all like, oh, I need to know what this bonus sheet rare is like because I might open it. And the chances to open a bonus sheet mythic are so low. Frankly, it's not usually worth the time, except to have a vague idea of what's going on. Except, you know, people are terrified about how it will affect the one draft they might maybe do, like on sub 0.5%. They spend a lot of time and a lot of ink on evaluating these bonus sheet cards. So what I did is I de-emphasized the bonus sheet cards because they are so rare and put them in a card evaluation section on their own so that people can study them and not lose perspective on the approach and the learning. That's why they're separated. All right, bonus shits. So this is the... I actually had to create a new tier. I had the bomb tier, but this is the... Yeah, holy shit tier. You know, like... Urza... Atraxa, Smuggler's Copter, and Winota are so powerful, they just warp your deck. So, kind of, okay. Kind of funnily enough, we let Winota wheel at the house, and I'm guilty of this. So there is some merit to checking card evaluations. But the card was so new, we didn't have it. But yeah, Winota is completely stupid. I should have figured that out. Like, wait a second. Because also in this set, all the good creatures are humans. The small creatures are non-humans, and all the bombs are humans. It's kind of a weird set in that sense. So that was actually kind of funny. But yeah, Winota was busted. Yeah, and then I go for these cards. I'm not going to go for them, but you know. Just setting up the stage so that they can read it through this stuff later. If there's a card that's like powerful in a 2-color combination, like Finn, is only good in green-blue, I'll put a pip to remind them, like, you know, for example, we have Golbez in green-black and Finn in green-blue. Then I'll go for them, playables tier, filler tier, garbage tier. Then sideboard tier, because these will never fall. There are some people who did try to play Carpet of Flowers in Best of One. Great for them. But obviously these cards don't appear in stats, especially early on. So just talking about them as sideboard option. Carpet of Flowers never came up, but that would be a vicious sideboard option, in my opinion. All right, then we talk about special notes. So Mizzix's Mastery I covered in the preliminary. Bolas' Citadel had a very variable win rate, and in a Spale-based format might be quite strong, but like I was kind of like, look, if you're drafting this, good luck. Because it's so counterintuitive to know how to make it work that like I basically advised. Diabolic Intent was kind of the same. Normally this card isn't very good, but this set has a very high ceiling in terms of power level, in terms of the best rares and mythics, and a lot of permanents that create things like heroes, so like or 1/1s that generate value. So like it has a higher quality threshold than usual. So actually Diabolic Intent was actually performing okay, so that's kind of interesting. Then I talk about sideboard cards. So one of the things I do is I check best of free data. I think with Edge of Eternities, definitely do that. Like, I check it when like the set is a week and a half old or a week old, right? So like when the set is free, like 2 months old, you should definitely be checking this, not just relying on best of one data. So I talked that Ultimacia was much stronger in best of free. Adventurous Airship was also an example of a card that was actually playable in best of free. Combat Tricks and Best of Free were worse because people knew about them, but turns out you sometimes need them. And then talking about like cards that were better in the sideboard, like Coral Sword is a perfect example of like very good if your creatures line up exactly by 1 point, very bad otherwise. Curl was a great example that was, I think, better in Best of Free than in Best of One because the 2/2 body is normally irrelevant, but sometimes, you know, they don't have too much of the 2/3s. They have a lot of the 1/1 Town Greeter, and they have 6/6s, etc. Then it becomes better. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Cargo Ship was, again, that 2/3 body. Like, how relevant is that? Then I talk about underrated cards, overrated cards, so rares, mythics. Generally, overrated rares, mythics, I don't spend too much time on because like I have to think that like at the Pro Tour they'll be overrated as well. But anyways, these are underrated rare, mythic. Dark Confidant, actually a bomb in the set, kind of interestingly. Then talk about underrated commons, uncommons. You've seen a lot of these. Eden, Adventures in, Magic Damper, cards that are free. These are great examples, by the way, for at the end of a presentation going like, this doesn't fit into any grand scheme, but, you know, you're getting these cards for free. You know they're wheeling, so, like, if you needed a playable, you could do much worse than knowing that these cards exist, right? So it's important to put context on stuff like this so that, like, you know, those picks 9, 10 where, like, kind of your picks are automatic, you know where to look. Then I talk about the cards I'm not sure, so we went for a lot of these. I think Town Greeter was ambitious to even put here. It was technically underrated online, but definitely wouldn't be at the Pro Tour. But again, underrated online, but probably not at the PT. Then I talk about overrated rares and mythics. So this one I specifically talk about rares and mythics that I think the Pro Tour players were overrated. And this isn't necessarily cards that are bad. So Van Street Thief is totally unplayable, pretty much. But it's value it down, right? Like, so Aerith, Clive, Cloud, Gix, Jekt, you would put as like bombs, powerful reasons to be in an archetype. They're just okay. And they all have reasons for that. I won't go into them, but they're all just kind of okay cards. Matoya is like, oh, this might be okay. It's not. It's terrible. Vincent, oh, it's a bomb. It's good. Venat, same deal. Like, it's basically going grade down these cards, not that they're bad. I continue on. So some of these are actively bad. Like, kept seeing, like Tifa Lockhart went in way too many decks at the house. I try to tell them it's bad. Kept being in. There's always like a rare mythic that like there's nothing I can do to convince the team until the very, very, very end, like the last draft, to stop playing with them. Like very late. Tifa was that one in our house this time. In Aether Drift, it was the clone, the 4-mana one with cycling. So yeah, these are cards that are overrated. The nice of the round is like, again, a powerful card just doesn't have a home. So again, these cards can be powerful. It's just the problem of housing or whatever. And then overrated commons and uncommons is probably the most important because they're much more likely to be exposed to these, and much more likely to see them. So I talk about cards that I just would not play in almost any deck. Now the Ramen was a house thing. Like, some people in the house really liked Instant Ramen. It's like a fine role filler, but they were overvaluing it, so I was like trying to dial down their enthusiasm, so to speak. But yeah, these are like these are cards they were keep putting into their decks, and that I had to keep telling them just don't. Like, they're probably worse than a basic land in a lot of scenarios. And then I give a gold card recap for them to read. We're not going to go with this. This is like just a fuller recap of the gold slides. But again, with this presentation, right, with all of the approach, right, is what we do before we go to the tournament, before we go to the house with a recent limited set. I tell them just play the pre-release, have fun. Don't think about card evaluation. Don't think about archetypes yet. Just play the cards, have a good time. Learn what the mechanics are. Learn attacking and blocking. That's all I care about. I just care about you learning stuff. We get to the house 3 days after the set releases online. We have data, right? At that point, we do the preliminary. We go for what the archetypes look like, what our mission statement is, the basics, right? They start drafting. We lay them down into pods. We start going like, okay, do your draft, ask for help, don't ask for help, whatever you feel comfortable with. Look for information online, look at the stats if you want, whatever makes you comfortable in the draft. Do the draft. Drafts are done. All the games are played. Swiss. Put the decks back on the table. I do a pre-interview with each of them, talking about their deck, what happened, the ups and downs. I make notes. I then do a summary opening. Each person then describes how their draft went, overperformers, underperformers. I'm basically there to sum up, and if they said something to me in private that they forgot to say in public, I can also emphasize like, oh, also you mentioned this, which is important for everybody. So I do a small recap and move on to the next person. For the next house, what I would recommend is to lay the picks in order. So to have the picks 1 to 7 or whatever is relevant so that people can see how the draft went and we don't lose time on, oh, I don't remember my pick. No, people can see it much cleaner. We talk about each draft. We do the review starting from Frio, do each of them around the table. I do a recap after the draft reviews of each person. This is what you need to remember. For the next draft, I would like you to keep this in mind. So like all the 15, 16 people there, hurry the message. Next time, this is what to keep in mind. So each draft is a lesson into the next one. Tuesday, constructed day, I do the presentation. So I'm building that presentation from A to Z. All of it. I build this whole thing, these 80 whatever slides in one day. Wednesday morning, I go through it. We go step by step. I explain what I think the approach for the Pro Tour should be. Pod draft, what the metagame is, what the approach should be, what you should remember, what the vision is, what you should try to accomplish. Then from that macro vision, I break it down into these are the details. These are the archetypes, their strengths, their weaknesses. What makes you want to go in an archetype? What makes you want to go away from an archetype? How I can identify these archetypes are open. What am I trying to accomplish to get into these? What am I trying to do at the table? What am I trying to read? Those are then the details. Then from the details, we go into the micro details. The micro details are card evaluation within archetypes. At that point, I'll do an overview, but I will increasingly go towards the workbook approach of I'll explain stuff. If you have a question, please ask. However, this is also on your own time. However, the resources are here. After that, we have, in this case, we had 2 drafts. So we had one more draft with the lessons that were learned. And then we had one final draft, which was called. So we have a draft which is meant to be still a discussion. Like, oh, I need to understand what's going on. And then we have a second draft. And that one is time. So we clock it. We make sure it's in Pro Tour conditions. And we still have the draft review, but each person's on their own for it as if Pro Tour conditions. So that's like the last training draft and last opportunity to make sure everybody got it right, that we see like... By the time we get to kind of the Monday, Wednesday drafts, the tables get really hard, right? Like, because everybody's aware of what's good and bad, roughly. Everybody's been briefed. There's no weak drafting. Everybody is like kind of sharp. So like, the pod gets a lot harder. The decks are worse, but... What's a good sign is if everybody kind of found their lane. Even in the bad deck, they were like, found my lane, didn't pan out, or something that made it so that they lost their matches. Or, actually, I found this new discovery that led, in a weaker setup, I found this synergy that enabled this. So, like, if they're at a really strong pod, especially day 2, then they have that. And then they go for the Pro Tour. Usually at the Pro Tour itself, I'll look at decks. I will give them evaluation. Obviously because it's a con, it's a little harder. Like, I don't have access to the area as fast. It can be difficult, but I try to look at their decks. I try to evaluate. I try to help. Like, obviously by the time the draft is done, there's a limited amount I can help on, but if I was to recap our process in terms of what I would do next time, you don't have to do everything I do as one person. I think it's actually healthier to do it as multiple people. It's just that in my case, I have the experience, know-how, and means to do it and experience. If you want to break it down so it's more reasonable, have one person handling the data, have one person handling the approach. The approach and data person should communicate non-stop. That's really important. And then have one person do the reviews, so like talking to people, getting things up. Now, you can conflate a little bit all of this, but having 3 people is a lot better. Then when the presentation's done, you know, a little bit of each is best. You know, the data person prepares, like, this is the stuff you need to know. Then the vision person goes on top and completes from data to vision to approach to communication. So things I will evaluate. This PT, I was a little worried after day 1 because our draft record was a little above 50%, but barely, and that was not a good sign. But then draft 2, they like exploded. They did 65+% win rate, so like draft 2 was great. I don't know if there's like a correlation or a lesson there. Like sometimes it is wins and losses. Like, I don't know if draft 1, like the approach was bad, but draft 2 was like, it's not enough games to say that. So we had 59 once we removed team kills, 59% win rate, which is good for us, especially because our constructed win rate was better. But like, again, our win rate was low the draft 1, which... You know, if our win rate was bad draft 2, that would still excuse the better constructed way. It doesn't. The 2 aren't as correlated. It's just we improved constructed a lot this Pro Tour. For limited, we kind of stayed the course. That's why I would call our process a B. I think the individual discussions helped the reviews a lot, so it helped information retention. I think these are getting a little overcomplexified, so I want to dial down the complexity and increase the messaging. I think our best Pro Tours have been Pro Tours with the right message set correctly. So MKM and MH3, a lot simpler and a lot more to the point, but the message was correct. So for MKM, it was land drops, curve on time, tricks. Anything that doesn't do one of those things is not a good card. It turned out very simple message, super effective. Everything else was details, but it was very much about you need to go land 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every deck needs to curve out because the games are short, because you can't block, so you need to curve out every single game. So we were almost advocating 18 lands. because of that. And in MH3, it was about engine-based, right? So, like, a lot of people saw MH3 as a synergy-based format. It was an engine-based format. You want your deck to do the same thing every time. The decks that did the same thing every time had a huge advantage over the decks that didn't. So that was, like, the lesson. But with Final Fantasy, I think our biggest flaw was that we had a few newer players in Limited and a few newer players on the team. And I think there were kind of two flaws. One was we didn't play all the games, which I think is not great. It wasn't too much of a problem, but it still was one. I think that's a small problem. I think the amount of information was really high. I think that's a small problem too, because the more if you put too much information on somebody, then they might lose filtering what's important, not important can be really hard. So the more you focus on what's important, the less you focus on what's not important really matters, right? So the more I'm telling you about the difference in 1% win rate with 2 low-end cards compared to make sure you're doing this here, like taking 5, like building your deck correctly is so much more important than like the difference between 2 cards, right? And the more I talk about the difference between 2 cards, the worse it is for that person, like because of information. The biggest flaw, I think, was that we had people who were struggling at the house and struggled at the Pro Tour. The reason for that is we'll always have people struggling at the house because the drafts are hard and you're facing good opposition. So by default, some people will do worse at the house. That's just a fact. That's okay. The problem is I don't want them doing poorly at the Pro Tour, right? So the important part for me is success is also in the number of O-frees we miss. Like an O-free is a true disaster. Like, we should have almost no freeze. I think we had 2 this time, which is low, but, like, I think we got a Pro Tour with 1 or 0. And the approach we do is very good to avoid going O-free in draft. Because, obviously, you want a trophy, and it does help the trophy, but it is very good at removing the losses at the low end, too. So, one of the things, though, I didn't do as well is I didn't identify that some of the players on the team were struggling at the house, but would also struggle at the PT. That was a tough thing for me, was because often people would struggle at the house again. But how to identify that and how to help those people with more one-on-one coaching and limited. Like, okay, let me check your draft. Okay, let's discuss the gameplay and just make sure that they're on the right path, right? Like for 2 or 3 people, I can take that extra time. I can't do it for everybody. At some point, it stops. But for 2 or 3 people, I saw the message. Hey, Joseph. For 2 or 3 people, you can make the time. So I think that was the biggest flaw with this Pro Tour, is I didn't protect the people who were struggling as much as I should have. Thankfully, I think it was 2, but still, those 2 people didn't requalify. And it wouldn't have taken, I think, much in Limited for them to requalify. So, again, while it's individual responsibility, results are results, I could have identified and maybe prevented that. So that's like a learning lesson. That's why I call it a BS, because the expectation's higher over time, right? The more you do well, the more you're expected to try to improve things. So the improvements we put are good. It was still a good process. It was mostly respected, so that's a B for me, because there's still some issues, and it wasn't like an all-timer. Like MH3 and MCAM would have been A's, of course. So that's really it for the next one. I'll respond to you in a bit, Krava, because that's a good question. Am I playing at the PT or just coaching? What I would recommend for Edge of Eternities. So for Krava's point, am I playing the PT or just coaching? So for this Pro Tour, I was just coaching. I wasn't qualified. I am qualified for the next Pro Tour. However, because this is a stream in VOD, I will just say that for personal reasons, I have asked for a deferral in the Pro Tour. That's going to become apparent anyways at some point. I've also asked for a deferral on the regional championship. I probably will not be playing Paper Magic until 2026. Again, that's for personal reasons that have nothing to do with Magic. Or pretty much nothing to do with Magic. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that. That said, I will probably, for Atlanta, coach online, the team. especially because it's a long-term limited. Where we're probably going to do is pod draft online. So we're going to do drafts between each other because that allows us to play the Swiss rounds. That's actually something that's important. If the format is later, you can do that. I'm not a fan of playing limited too early. I actually prefer playing limited at purpose for a metagame. So, because it's a week 7 metagame, I'm actually going to recommend that they only play limited for, 2 or 3... the first 2 or 3 weeks, just don't bother with anything organized. Oh yeah. Like yeah. But yeah, like I like doing this anyways. Like I like focusing on high level limited, so it's okay for me to do this and not even play. Like I like high level limited. I like analyzing it. We have 17 lands that provides data that's public, and for me, this is also why I do this. Is part of the remit of the team is we can't take everyone in, so part of that has to be to express our process externally. So this is what part of that remit. Plus 17 lands data is public, so to have 17 lands data, right, being public, then part of this presentation comes from public work. So I have to, so that's also why I like sharing it, and I don't like being too secretive about it. But yeah, for Edge of Eternities, you better believe I will be going deep into that set eventually, though. I will probably skip the first 2 or 3 weeks because I don't think it's relevant. I think a lot of the biggest trap with the next limited set is that you can fall into that trap of trying to play that set too much. You need to play it with purpose. You need to identify what is going to matter for the metagame of the Pro Tour. Not what beats week 2. Not what beats week 3 metagame. What works metagame week 7 or 8 at the Pro Tour is what's going to matter to you. So, if you think you know the format week 3, you will get cleaned by the time you hit the Pro Tour if you don't evolve. My answer to that is I don't bother testing for week 3 because I see it as a result a waste of time, except for the purpose of having fun. And that's going to be my recommendation for the team. We're going to probably do some pod drafts online because that allows me to do the analysis and to put less pressure on the house. It still allows us to do pod drafts and to discover things, but I will probably do this a little later. We will have access to a treasure trove of information. You too can have access. Be part of that 17 Lens community, and you will see stuff you wouldn't believe. I won't tell you what it is. Just get in there. Otherwise, I'm going to close it because we're getting ads in a bit. Yeah, thank you all for coming. I'm going to ship you somewhere. The VOD will be available, so if you want to rewatch any part, you've missed it, don't worry. I will put this up on Twitch. I will put this up on YouTube. Yeah, Sir Alga, thank you. Actually, let's wait for the ad break. Tell you what, the ad break is going to start. Think of some questions. If you have any questions about any of this content, things you're thinking for the Pro Tour, for any competition you have, this is a great time. So I'm going to let the ad roll, because I literally can't stop it. In a way, that's good. When we're back, I'll answer the questions, then I'll ship you somewhere. So if you want to go for it. And yeah, for VOD enjoyers, just getting into, again, I'll wait for the questions and do it. You can probably skip a minute to a minute and a half for the ads. I think the ads are running. It'd be really bad if the ads weren't running. Oh, Lorenzo, hey. Yeah, so, like, I don't know if you can listen because I don't know if the ads have started. They're just like the ads will begin. But yeah, yeah, so I played a side event at the, at MagicCon Vegas, for the VOD enjoyers, and I ended up with an Alienware computer. Long story short. I haven't received it yet. I'm trying to figure out, like, they have to contact me and figure out shipping. But yeah. Ah, there we go. Ad break started. Cool. So yeah, but yeah, for the next Pro Tour as a result, I'm going to do a lot of the testing for limited, like, remotely. That makes sense. It's a little weird to not necessarily attend the Pro Tour. I do like Modern, but and I'm happy to discuss the actual reasons in person. Like, if you want to contact me and ask, that's fine. I just don't want it, because this is a video on demand. I don't want it to be recorded like in detail. But like you're more than welcome if we've had any kind of chat to reach out, get in touch, and ask. It's fine. I'm pretty open about it. Just again, it's content on the internet. Always be a little cautious with that stuff. But yeah, I hope you you enjoyed at least this. This is a bit of a different take. Obviously, like I focused on the presentation side, which is like what our conclusions were, what we found. Part of that is to compare notes. Like if you were tested for that Pro Tour, you'd be able to see, you know. Yeah. Ooh, another person from that event apparently. And we're back. Cool. So to fill out, there was an event called Race the Storm at MagicCon Vegas, which was 3 rounds of standard, 3 rounds of Tarkir draft, and then a top 8 Tarkir draft. Basically, top 4 got a lot of prizing. Now, the weird part about that event is it wasn't very well attended because I think it didn't involve FF products, so that already was a knock. It was 2 days. So, like, if you were competing for something serious, you were missing out on a second day of competition, probably. Like, you know, some drafts, competitive draft tickets. There's a lot you could miss out on, and crazy MagicCon. Like signing up to the right events, like, you could get promos worth hundreds of dollars. Going O2 drop, it didn't matter. There was a PDQ as well. So, like, you needed competitors who didn't want to do the PDQ. So, like, probably, but the PDQ was filled up. So, it was people who wanted, like, so it was people who couldn't sign up for the PDQ, had time, weren't too interested in doing something else, and had a standard deck, plus ready to play draft. It was a lot of ifs, so we ended up with 33 people. So it was kind of a weird event. But yeah, first place prize was the Alienware computer, which I secured, which was nice. Thankfully, Derek Davis loaned me his Omniscience deck, which was some of the silliest standard decks I've ever played. Completely crazy deck. And then like because I had drafted Tarkir for Spotlight Series in Denver, and the other one was the MTGO, the Mock Showcase Open. I did the seal deck and drafted in the top 8 there. I was well versed in the format. Didn't actually draft that good a deck, I think, actually. But you know, it was good enough. But yeah, okay, so thank again, Sterile Guy, for saying that, you know, this has been the best competitive content I've seen in a while. I appreciate that. I'm doing the, like, I'm not, you know, I'm doing this mostly from, again, a perspective of sharing and trying to make sure we all level up. That's the important part. But yeah, all right, since I don't see any questions, I'm going to ship you somewhere. Let's see, somebody who plays limited. Let me refresh Twitch. Court of Calls is cool. Court of Calls is pretty good. It's very unlikely I ship you somewhere else. Yeah, pretty obvious ship here. All right. No, I appreciate it, yeah. Before I log off, like, okay, so actually, this is important. If you're on your own for the next Pro Tour, or next competition in limited that's high level, like maybe an Arena Open, right? An Arena Open is a great example. Obviously, this is great for a Pro Tour where I have a testing team where you're like, wow, it'd be great to have a house with 16 people and learn all this stuff. You might not have access to this, actually. That's true. One of the kind of important ways to implement this at a much lower level is part of it comes from experience, but it's to try to always just do +1 psychology, right? So like go like analyze the data online, right? Like look at what the pick orders are for cards, look at what people are doing. Start looking at what the top players are doing, right? Like what's the difference in pick order? You can actually take both spreadsheets, download the CSVs, compare like the average last taken at. So like you can see top players taking some cards higher. Then adjust the data for what the top players are doing and ask yourself the question, okay, from that, what's going to be harder to get and what's going to be easier to get? And then go like, okay, this is going to be harder to get and this archetype is such and such quality. And these are going to be easier to get and this archetype is such and such quality. Sometimes that changes completely how you draft. If you, like, Bloomborough was a great example personally on the Arena Opens for me because I identified quickly that the perception of people wasn't matching reality. They were like, oh, the absent colors are the best. So people were focusing on colors archetypes when you dug deep into it. The reason, the rationale in that format was actually about like every card is a secret gold card. It was so archetype, two-color archetype driven that a lot of single color cards were basically two colors. So once you identify that, you go like, well, okay, so all these two-color combinations are playable. Only blue-white was bad, really, truly. So I drafted 4 different combinations, and I just forward each time. And one of the decks was truly silly. I wasn't going to lose with that one. But, and a lot of it came because I was watching streamers like the Ham TV, Darkest Mage, who don't watch data. I think this is important from a news quality perspective. Watch different people. I recommend people like Sirkovitz, people like Court of Calls, who are very data focused. And I also recommend people like the Ham TV Darkest Mage who are not data focused, because they will be wrong very often. I've seen them be very wrong. Other times though, they are prescient, presentient, like they get what's going to happen. So like one of the things with Bloomborough is like they started drafting blue-red a lot more, and when I looked into it, it turned out that the data hadn't come in, right? Once I started filtering data away from the first couple of weeks and more into what was going on more recently, turned out their call was correct. Maybe not every card, but their call was correct because nobody was valuing blue-red, right, in Bloomborough. So, like, you had basically top uncommons in those archetypes wheeling. I got one last pick for that archetype because people weren't valuing the cards correctly. So, like, if you're ever on your own, always try to figure, okay, this is what I think people will do in this metagame, right? It's just the same process as in Constructed. It's what is the metagame going to be at this tournament, and how can I fight this metagame? Limited and Constructed aren't different in that way. Both have metagames. You need to understand what the metagame is. So even if you're on your own, you can still figure out a metagame. So like obviously you're going to miss on the details. You're going to miss on some of the card synergies. It's too much info, all that stuff. You might have to do more work on your own. But what you're not going to miss out on, if you're smart and look into it, is what the metagame's going to be and how I can level to that metagame. Once you know that, you'll do much better in limited at those tournaments. All right. How do you know what the top players are prioritizing? So I am lucky to see them draft, so it's actually kind of easy for me because I'm doing all these draft reviews, right? So I can see what they're doing. Oh, if you're meaning in 17 lands, let's do that. 17 lands. So if I go into card data, let's move this to Premier Draft. Let's remove the first couple. Let's remove the first week where people are doing nonsense. So, all right, yeah, because I should show you that. That's true. Sorry. Okay, so we're gonna go into this is average taken at. I think this is the right stat. So you can sort by name. You can export data, download as CSV, and then you go into all users top here. That'll refresh, of course. And now you're going to get the top users. So then copy that, focus on this stat, the average taken at, and then compare. Like basically compare the average taken at from normal players and top players. You can sort the average taken out in a separate spreadsheet. That's like if you want to go in depth. If you don't want to go in depth, just look at top and like look like roughly here. This requires more knowledge and is more back and forth. You can open also a second tab, right? So you can have tab 1, tab 2, and just compare. If this is too much info, so you could just remove the scene. You can remove, you can remove most of these stats and just keep it to like whatever you feel is needed here. So I'll whatever you can do. So. Is it based on what the data says is the strongest color archetype? So this is more interesting. Pros, like any human being, are prone to biases. And competitors at the Pro Tour are all prone to biases. No matter what happens, I know that our team will face people who are biased. That is just a fact. Like, people at the Pro Tour will be biased. That's just 100% guaranteed. I don't need to figure that out. They will be biased. The only question I have is, what are they biased on? So, I can check online data for what they're biased on. Generally, top-level players, if it says draw a card, filter a card, that kind of stuff, they'll be more biased towards it. They're going to be biased. The more old school they are, the more they're going to be biased towards stat lines that they shouldn't be into, like 2/2s for 2 and stuff. So like, you know, I check it based on, they're going to think in terms of colors, though the biases are that they don't think as holistically in terms of archetypes. That will change, right? Because with information and time, but most competitors won't still do it. For Edge of Eternity, we might actually see it. We might actually see people thinking correctly in terms of archetypes. But anyways, so I know they'll have biases based on, and everybody for Limited tends to just dive in, right? Like the set releases day one and they're like in it, right? They're like, I need to play. And they learn the wrong things. Like when you should go to a pre-release and have fun online. Like honestly, I'm not advocating to drink, but just do something fun. Like watch a movie while you draft, whatever. Like just do something that semi-distracts you a little bit so that you're having fun. Whatever it is that you need to do to be in a fun mood, do that. Don't focus on the learning of the cards and the quality and all that stuff. Focus on the, oh, this mechanic's cool. I love it. This is great. Because Magic should be an enjoyable game, first off. Second off, when you're having fun, you're not focusing so much on just the learning, because you're going to learn the long lessons anyways right now. So just don't do that. Don't learn the wrong stuff. So it's okay to like that a new Limited set is out. It's okay to want to draft a bunch of it. Just don't learn the wrong conclusions, because every testing house before, now it's better, but before I had to unteach people, and unteaching is the worst thing you can do. Like, it's very easy to tell someone what to do. It's very hard to tell them that what they are doing is wrong. That is super difficult. The less of it you have, the better it is. If you're interested again in like all this stuff, psychology books are really important to understand how the human brain works, how to teach people, like learn how teaching works, learn how to like communicate information, learn how communication works, like how people process information. You'll notice I move my hands a lot. That's normal. Like what I say is the hardest thing for you to remember. What I'm showing visually, what I'm doing with my hands, what I'm doing with my voice, what I'm smiling, not smiling, etc. That's the stuff that's communicating to you much, much more strongly than anything I say. So, again, if you're interested in this stuff, very important to know about the communication, learning the psychology, all that stuff. Learning how humans have biases is one of the best out of everything. Learn how biases work. There's a few psychological books on it. The problem is the ones I read, I have trouble recommending for offer ideological reasons, which I'll leave at that. But there's a bunch of books on there on psychology that don't require you to support an offer. Yeah, not very happy with them anyways. That's a different conversation. But learn how biases work. Learn how your brain works. Learn how you can self-trap yourself in biases. Because you don't want to be biased. You will have some bias, but you need to remove those biases as much as possible. It'll make your life so much better in so many ways. But it'll make you better at Limited, because you're more open to learning and discovery too without biases. And yeah, the last part of your question, you have to figure it out and have confidence. I'm not going to say, like, I have played Magic for a long time. I have played high-level Limited for a long time. I've clearly done well in high-level Limited, and I am interested in being even better in Limited than I was, right? Like, I was good, but I took the time to become even better. That's not everybody. If it is you, keep going. I think Limited is one of those attributes in Magic that is lifelong. The work you do in Limited today will make you better at Limited long term. I think more than Constructed will, to a degree. Learning a Limited metagame is very different to learning a Constructed metagame, in the sense of you're not learning it the same way. There's less repetition. There is some repetition, but less. And yeah. Oh, yeah, and again, if you're on your own, try to just arrange some pod drafts online. Like, just talk to other competitors who are on their own and do it. All right. Oh, I think the cat happened. Something happened to her. I'm gonna check that. Yeah. Okay. She's just being silly. Yeah, she's being silly, so that's okay. Thinking Fast and Slow. Yeah, so that's the read I was referring to. There's a lot of references to the offers time in the IDF, which, yeah. So I'm giving you that warning. It is a good book. It does teach you a lot. It is a very great generation boomer in its approach otherwise. So some caution before you start reading it. If you do understand that caution stuff, do read it. It is a very interesting read. But I am warning you about that stuff now. Books, I also but there's a bunch of stuff. There's also How the Mind Works from Steven Pinker, which I have there. Again, different way of problem, but yeah. That's the thing with like old books. Reading them is always a joy. Okay, so last questions. Let's see here. Is there anything? Oh yeah. So closing that gap. One biases again, because a lot of those top players are not doing these methods. I don't know why. Could be a lack of discipline. Could be they think they're better. They're not. I'm sorry to say. This is the one part where I'm going to be a little harsher. They could do better. Now, if they don't... So like somebody who doesn't, I'm fully sympathetic to. Because if you don't know, you don't know. This is whatever. And if you desire to learn, I'm always incredibly sympathetic and empathetic to that. And I'm super supportive. And I'm going to... And I do spend time with people who want to learn and give them that time. But the hubris and biases and ego are your edge. You don't have those, they do. Trust me. That's your edge. Because you can put in the work knowing that you're struggling and in trouble and trying to get better. Look at the data. Analyze the data. Don't focus on just your personal experience. Look at what other people are doing. Look at what other people are saying. Check afterwards. Yes, this makes sense. This is a great approach. No, this doesn't make sense. But why? Why are they saying this? What is their bias here? What is causing them this blind spot? It's not about people being right or wrong. It's why are they right? Why are they wrong? And what can you learn from it? And what can you implement in your process? So if you're trying to close the gap, look, this is a 7-week limited set. You don't need to play day one, but like start playing like that week 3 and go like, okay, take the time per draft. Watch other people drafting. Draft yourself, of course. Play yourself, because playing is a different skill set. That takes a long time. You're not going to be able to beat the top players on play almost ever because they have too much experience. But like again, the whole purpose of the testing process that we've done with Worldly Counsel is to help people who don't have high level or limited experience and are not going to play as well on the table crush high level players. Because I know they will not play as well, right? If you're, if you're sitting down across one of the world championship contenders at the top level, they're going to play better than you. What I want to do is make sure that whoever's on our team knows how to draft the best deck possible, so when they sit down, they have a deck advantage. And consistently, that's why our limited record has been good, is I've made very sure that that's the case from start to finish. That when one of our teammates sits down, they have a deck advantage against the opponent. The more you do that, the bigger the edge. Again, like Constructed, we have a deck for the metagame, they don't. That's how you get your edge. If things evolve, everybody plays the deck correctly, then you're going to have to increase technical play. And unfortunately, that is time and effort. There's not much I can help you there. Get coaching from good players. Limited coaching with good people is dirt cheap, I think, compared to it. If you're a student and can't afford it, try to find somebody who does provide that coaching for people in financial difficulty. There are some. But that's basically what I recommend. Your edge is you don't have biases. Use that. Trust me. It takes 4 to 5 years to crush egos and biases to oneself. If somebody has an ego and a bias, making them lose that takes years. Psychologically, once the brain is formed, it takes years to get away from something like that. Use that to your advantage. Learn. Because again, you won't beat them at play, but you can make sure when you sit down you have a much better deck than them. Because they will make those mistakes. Because for whatever reason, people think either data is absolute or that information is absolute talking, right? And the truth is it's a mix of both. Ignoring data is folly because it's just reality. Now, reality that might be misinterpreted, reality that might be misregistered, but there is a reality there. But using only data, you're going to draft maybe not as well because you lack context in a pod, you lack counter drafting, you lack communication. You're not gonna you don't have the spreadsheet in your brain, right? So you're gonna make mistakes on that. So like you need to have both. You need to have the data-centric approach, or what we do is a data-informed approach. We might do a data-centric one with Edge of Eternities because the information quality is much higher. But normally I do a data-informed approach. That when you go though, like what they remember is words, but what those words come from is numerical. It's the same logic as well behind passwords. You should have passwords that are phrases, because not like random letters and numbers. Like apart from like the super security stuff, which I won't get too into, but like for average day-to-day life, because you'll remember a phrase super easily, but it's super hard to crack a phrase. Yeah, I hope all that was helpful. Yeah, for as well the listeners. I know like one person talks, but like usually somebody else gets it. So all right, let's raid good old protocols. I think this is the correct command. Raid channel. Yes. I think this works. All right, protocols is excellent. Please enjoy time with him. I'll jump in with you for a couple of minutes, and thank you. I'll put this VOD on Twitch and YouTube. Take care, all. No. got the raid command wrong. And there we go. Excellent. Pile.